Americans love to shop. From video games and electronics to cosmetics and fashion, shopping is truly an American pastime. And our culture defines shopping as a decidedly feminine pursuit. Think about it. How many commercials on television feature overzealous female shoppers just itching to catch a bargain on the latest sale? How many magazines, movies, and ads display the image of women up to their ears in shopping bags and fatigued by a long and arduous day of shopping? In our consumer culture, women are seen as the consumers. But why? How did consumerism and shopping come to be associated with femininity? And how have women influenced the fashion industry and our modern consumer culture as producers, and more than just consumers? Modern American consumer culture arose on the backdrop of the 19th century, a time in which America experienced rapid urbanization and industrialization, which was making fundamental shifts in cultural attitudes towards women. By the mid-1800s, the Industrial Revolution was well underway, including the manufacture of cotton and woolen textiles. Clothing was especially transformed, whereas their grandmothers sewed every stitch of garments, even raising sheep to provide wool. New textile and garment factories allowed low-cost purchases of ready-made clothing. While their grandmothers often owned just one good dress for Sunday use, modern women could enjoy frequent changes of clothing.
This period of time when consumer culture was really coming to the fore in the United States was a time of tremendous change, a time of really seismic shifts in everything about American culture, American society, the American economy, how people spent their days, how people made their livings, how people got their clothes, how people got their furniture, how people got all of the material of daily life. So really it's about the shift from people as fundamentally producers of much, certainly not most of what they got. I mean, people traded things. Someone was skilled in carpentry, someone else was skilled in sewing. So it's not the case that everybody was doing everything before, but most of the things that most people had and used in their daily lives were things that they had grown, things that they had made, things that they had produced, or things that somebody that they knew had grown, made, produced.
With this new mass production of goods, businesses crafted new methods of distribution, promotion, and sales, which established the framework of our modern consumer culture. As businesses thought of new ways to sell their products and expand consumer demand, they adopted new methods of merchandising, packaging, and advertising. The image of the female consumer was one of the cultural and marketing phenomena that emerged from new advertising. Consumer identity became linked with notions of femininity and was seen as the way to a better life.
The fashion industry itself promoted the idea of women as consumers. And a quick look at any publication will give you a very clear sense of women in their many social roles. And these are mostly middle-class women. Women in sports, from women buying soap, to women with children, to women with animals, to women in the early 20th century in Model T cars. It's an amazing use of women as models in any way that one would sell merchandise.
Godey's ladies' books set the precedent for women's magazines, and by the turn of the century, the Big Six women's magazines, Ladies' Home Journal, McCall's, Delineator, Pictorial Review, and Good Housekeeping were founded.
All of the big women's magazines of the 20th century did appear during this time. The Ladies' Home Journal, the Women's Home Companion, Vogue, McCall's. Some of them had started as the kind of wish books that went along with the pattern companies that sold patterns for dresses. Some of them had been farm journals, but they turned into a new kind of magazine, the Women's Magazine, which both offered articles that appealed to women who were doing this new task of consumption, and they offered advertisers a place to find those women.
Vogue, begun in 1892 by Condé Nast, became the ultimate fashion trendsetter for upper-class women, who continued to use personal seamstresses after middle-class women had adopted ready-to-wear clothing. Maud Humphrey Bogart did illustrations for Harper's and Century magazines, and later was the art director for the fashion magazine Delineator, and Jessie Wilcox Smith earned an estimated annual income of $12,000 in 1910, and received between $1,500 and $1,800 for each of the nearly 200 Good Housekeeping covers that she illustrated between 1917 and 1933. Illustrator Charles Dana Gibson created the innovative Gibson Girl, who represented fashion's first American look with pictures of an athletic, confident young woman. She preferred simple shirtwaist dresses without bustles or other constraints, and was often pictured with a tennis racket or bicycle, both of which were new. The Gibson Girl was a real contrast to her foremothers, whose fragility was fashionable. For women who lived outside of large cities, mail-order houses like Sears and Montgomery Ward, which were also established during this time, made it possible to bring the conveniences of city to rural areas. Women made purchases from the company's mail-order catalogs, and their goods would be mailed to them. The first Sears catalog was published in 1888 and featured watches and jewelry. And by 1894, the catalog had expanded to include sewing machines, sporting goods, and some clothing. By the early 20th century, women were gaining access to higher education, professional careers, and jobs, including careers in fashion. One of these creative and industrious women in fashion was designer Elizabeth Hawes. Hawes was outspokenly critical of her industry and encouraged women to wear what they wanted instead of merely accepting the latest fashion. She was also a union organizer, political activist, and a proponent of gender equality. In 1925, she started her first job in Paris, where she was employed to steal designs from leading couturiers. She was disillusioned with her work and left the copy house in 1926 to become a sketcher in New York. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, Hawes would ask her women employees, who were often supporting unemployed families, what they needed to survive, and she paid them accordingly. World War II in the 1940s brought new challenges, as both clothing and shoes were rationed. Women nonetheless succeeded, including Nettie Rosenstein, the daughter of immigrants, who began sewing for clients in her home. Muriel King dressed some of Hollywood's most iconic stars, such as Katharine Hepburn and Ginger Rogers. No Hollywood designer, though, was as important as Edith Head. Head was hired to sketch fashion designs in the 1920s for Paramount Studios and would run the entire design department 15 years later. She later worked for both Paramount and Universal Studios and designed for an impressive 987 Hollywood films. Her designs included beautiful, head-beaded dresses for Carole Lombard, who starred in 1930s and 40s films. Head eventually won 8 Oscars for her work.